This is our social studies for the week of April 16th, or actually the day of April 16th. And this social studies, we're continuing to talk about communities and tourism. We're talking about how communities change over time. And as you look at the picture, you might be able to hazard a guess or make a guess as to where this is taking place. We are going to, at the end of this, you should be able to talk about how tourism changed Moab, and you'll talk about producers and consumers in the Moab economy, all things that we've talked about in the past. And there's some interesting technology as well that you're going to talk about and understand and investigate in Moab. We are going to review a couple of things just to remind you what they mean. As you're looking at this, and we're looking at our producers, remember that producers are the people who make or grow or provide goods and services. They might be the people that, as we talked about with our tart cherries, that grow the tart cherries, or they might be people who make different things that you use in your home. The consumer, those are the people who buy the goods and services that others make. So if you eat something, if you go to the ice cream stand and you buy ice cream, then you are a consumer. And if you look at this picture, actually this person that is making the pies there, she would be a producer, and you would be a consumer if you eat that pie. Just one more thing. Remember, the economics is the study of how people make choices to get what they want. And remember, there are some, they call them the laws of supply and demand. So supply has to do with how much of something there is. If we look at, there's only one M&M, then that's a low supply. But if there are just what looks like an infinite number of M&Ms, that's a high supply. And demand has to do with how much a person or a group of people wants something. So if you don't want something, that is low demand. If you do want something, then that is high demand. If there are a lot of people that are thinking, wow, I really want some chocolate, that's high demand. If there are only a few people there thinking, wow, I really want Brussels sprouts tonight, then that's a low demand. So keep those in mind as we further explore what we're going to. So we talked a little bit about tourism. We actually related it before to the ski industry. And we are going to look at this where it says 1 in 11 Utah jobs is supported by visitors spending, either directly or indirectly. So indirectly means maybe you don't work at a store where tourists come, but you still benefit from those tourists spending their money. And if we look in 2018, the national park visits, they had 10.6 million people that visited the national parks in Utah. That's pretty amazing. Skiers on Utah skiers, 5.1 million, and then our Utah State Park visits, 6.7 million. And I'm sorry that when I'm looking at that, I just realized I read that wrong. The national park visits would be parks across the country. And so 136,000 Utah jobs are supported by the travel and tourism industry. So we are going to talk about tourism. This time you're going to look at tourism in Utah's national and state parks. And then you're also going to learn how tourism changes a town over time. So when you look at the chart on this slide, you're going to do a little bit of math right here. And you're just going to type in your answer. How many visits did Utah State Parks and Utah National Parks have all together? So that was Utah National Parks. I apologize. So you're going to add up the visits to the national parks and the state parks, and you're going to type your answer in right there. All right. Now, have you ever visited a national or state park in Utah? And there are 5 national parks in Utah. And if you watch that little video, it's just very short, and it will introduce you to those 5 national parks. And I wouldn't be surprised if you have visited them. At least one of them. The great thing about this is that all of these parks are within a few hours drive. And it's pretty amazing that we have access to them just right here in Utah. You are going to look at this next slide. Now, my picture for some reason doesn't show the whole slide, but there are some pictures that surround the edges of this page. You're going to look at those closely. Read what the little bubble or the little caption box says, and then you're going to go ahead and move your pictures into that box. And we are going to be talking about Moab. And Moab is from farming to tourism. And we're going to kind of follow that path a little bit to see what happens. And we're going to talk about how technology changed the town of Moab. And you're being asked a little question there about how do you think Moab changed after the railroad, ferry, and bridge made travel to Moab easier? So think what happens to a place when it becomes easier to get to. And you should be able to type something in there. So you're going to watch a short video again about farming in Moab. It's actually a really interesting concept that this farmer is talking about. And he's talking about drip irrigation, which, as we have mentioned a little bit, in my class at least, we've been talking about how there is a water shortage. And Utah has droughts frequently, drought years, where there's not enough water. And so this is a unique and interesting solution that at least one farmer has come up with. So you'll need to read this side here, this little part right here. And it talks about how most of Moab's economy was ranching and farming from the late 1800s to the 1950s. And it was one of the best fruit growing areas in Utah. And then railroads and ferries and the bridges brought more business and later allowed them to more easily transport those goods and services to other places so that they could sell them. This next slide talks a little bit more about after the 1950s, Moab was part of the uranium mining boom, and later the potash mining boom. This is really, really interesting. I found this fascinating. So I want you're going to go ahead and read this on your own, and it talks about how Moab was at one time the nation's second largest uranium processing mill. And that brought in some new workers, but then people didn't have there wasn't as much demand for uranium. And so as that decreased, or as that went down in the early 1960s, potash became the most recent industry to hit Moab. So interesting. So this video that is on this page is actually, I found it fascinating. It's a little bit longer. It'll take you 15 to 20 minutes to watch it. But it talks about a really interesting thing that is being mined in Moab. And I think you'll really enjoy it. It's very interesting. So after you watch that video, then there's another page, Farming Moab went farming town, mining town, and now tourism town. And this page talks about how southern Utah, Moab, and then southern Utah as well, has become a place where Hollywood likes to film Western movies because it's so untouched. And the movie makers like to use Moab because it makes their movies more authentic or more real. So there are two little videos there. Both of them are short. The second video is from a movie that was made a long, long time ago. So you'll hear some different phrases and words used, maybe more different, used differently than we use them today. And then you're going to answer those two questions. Why was making movies in Moab good for the tourism economy? And think about that. If people know that a movie is made in a certain place and they really love the movie, what would that inspire them to maybe go see that place? And then who are the producers and consumers of the movies? So think about who produces them or who helps to make them, and then who consumes them, or in other words, who watches those movies? And you're going to answer that. And then the last page is just a reminder, kind of a summary of what you have learned with this set of slides. and talks about how Moab went from farming and then mining, and then it ended up going to being a place where movies are made, and it attracts people to the national and state parks that are there in that area. So that is social studies for this week. I hope you enjoy it, and I do hope you'll watch those videos because they are very interesting.